want to go over some of the general stuff. So I'll start there and then we'll take questions. So if you'd like to talk about your idea for a grant proposal, have any questions, you can contact us, Lori, Alana, or Jill at freshwaterfuture.org. And you can also call the 8200 number and you can get to all of us on the extensions at that number. Next slide. So a little bit about Freshwater Future. We've been around since 1996. Our mission has always been to help communities to protect and restore their water in their own communities. And that is across the Great Lakes region. So we work in Canada, the province of Ontario, and we also work in all 8 Great Lakes states. We primarily work in 3 areas. We provide funds, such as this one. We also do consulting with groups to build their capacity on issues, fundraising, planning, pretty much anything you can think of related to capacity. And then the third area is policy. We try to look at what we're seeing across communities and find policy solutions where possible. And then also we work with about 2,000 plus organizations across the region. So we have a lot of groups that are associated in some way with Freshwater Future. We have additional grants types available as well. If you have an emergency type need, we have what we call special opportunity grants. We also have some communications grants. I'll talk in a little bit more detail about these types of grants later in the presentation. And we also, if you have a need that we can't meet, we will try to help you find other funding sources that might be able to help. To be eligible for our grants programs, there are a few things. One is the project has to either take place within the Great Lakes Basin, which is the watershed of the Great Lakes, or be able to have some positive impact on the Great Lakes, the waters of the Great Lakes Basin. And that includes the whole states of the Great Lakes states, because many times that's where the power is. The capitals are mostly outside of the basin, and projects outside can set important precedents. So if you have questions about that, we're happy to talk it through with you, but don't just assume that is, if you're outside the basin that you wouldn't qualify. Also, to be eligible, we ask you to be a member of Freshwater Future. For small organizations, that membership is $100 a year. And if you can't meet $100 without a hardship, then we'll work with you to do whatever you can. That money helps us raise the funds we give away. And so that's why we ask for that buy-in. Another eligibility requirement is basically being grassroots. So that means most of the work happens by volunteers, and also that the budget of the organization is not generally over about 200,000. We don't have a specific cutoff point, but that's a rule of thumb. And then also the project has to do 2 things. Grassroots, that's the volunteer part mostly, and it has to have an advocacy component. So there's a lot of great science and great education and great stewardship projects out there that do wonderful things. But our fund is for projects that include an advocacy component, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then we'll go through both the spring funding cycle, and we'll also have a fall cycle. So every year we have 2 cycles of this, one at the end of March and one at the end of September. And then we'll go through questions. So I'm going to ask you to go to the next slide, Alana. I think we've heard enough about Freshwater Future, so I'm going to ask you to jump through that one. Thank you. All right. So with these grants programs, this is really a way for us to broaden up the partnerships we have throughout communities in the Great Lakes region. We've given out over $5 million in grants funded over 1,300 projects over the years. And that has allowed groups to protect thousands of acres of wetlands, restore miles and miles of stream banks, protected groundwater sources, removed hundreds of tons of sediment from waterways, and engaged hundreds of thousands of residents in protecting their own waters. So we're really proud of these programs, and we like to hear all of the good things that happen through your work. So always feel free to give us a ring and an update. Next slide, please. So the deadline for this cycle will be March 31st. The fall will be September 30th. Sometimes those fall on weekends, and we just leave them where they are because we know sometimes grassroots groups need weekends to do this work. So we don't change them to a weekday. And you can send them in until midnight that night, whenever you want to send it. Special opportunity grants, I've talked about a little bit. Those are the emergency grants. They're up to $750. And you send us a simple letter application. On the website, it'll tell you what to put in that letter. We don't want you to spend much time on it because we know you're in an emergency situation. And we turn those around within 2 weeks. So once you send us your request, we try to get a check out to you within 2 weeks if it's approved. And again, that's up to $750. Then we have consulting grants. So our staff has well over 100 years of collective experience managing nonprofits. And so we do provide one-on-one consulting with local organizations. And we have grants to help pay those costs as well. So that's another type of grant. You might see it also called an insight grant. And then finally, we have communications grants. We have two types. One is for professional communication consulting capacity building. So it's almost a year-long program that there's no monetary award, but you get to work with professional communications firm. And then the second one is we do have some funds to help build websites and dedicated databases for groups that don't have that. So those are our grant types and opportunities. Next slide, please. So we talked a little bit about the eligibility being grassroots, mostly volunteer driven, focused on water in the Great Lakes region or having an impact in the region. Current member of Freshwater Future, we can tell you that if you don't know. Past grant reports have been submitted. We appreciate that you're up to date with past grant reports. And then you do have to either be a US nonprofit, a 501c3 or a Canadian charity, or have a fiscal sponsor that is one of those things. Next slide. So again, grassroots groups have limited funds, rely on volunteers. We don't have a specific cutoff, but it tends to be around 200,000. And we use external grant readers. It's not just us making the decisions. And so they'll be looking at those criteria too. They're generally past grant recipients. So they're very focused on making sure advocacy and grassroots are important components. Next slide. So what does advocacy mean in this context? It doesn't mean you need to lobby. In fact, you can't lobby with these dollars. What it means is really supporting a recommendation for a particular solution. And that's a long-lasting solution. So we don't do just individual landowner stewardship because that tends to turn over with a home. When the land is sold, somebody else can take a different direction. We don't do education unless it does have an advocacy component where there will be a permanent change created. So that's really what we're talking about with advocacy. If you have something coming in and it's just going to destroy a wetland, for example, you can do advocacy with that corporation or advocacy with the state that's going to have to permit that destruction. So there are all kinds of advocacy. It's not lobbying, though. I know, especially for our Canadian colleagues, that can be concerning. Next slide. We've talked about the special opportunity grants, and one thing I forgot was that there is no deadline. That's just a rolling basis until we run out of money every year. Next slide. Okay, so what do we fund? We talked about this permanent change component. We're really looking at changing something out in the world or in policy. That could include things like creating manuals for a local municipality in terms of how they manage a particular waterway. So it doesn't have to be the type of thing where you're in the river or you're creating a new law. It can be that simple as creating a manual. Also, watchdogging. We fund projects that are watchdogging the development of any kind of development project, resource extraction, anything that needs a permit, how are things enforced that impact water. So really anything where residents are able to pay attention to what's happening regarding water and try to have an impact on that. And then creating opportunities to strengthen citizen involvement. So we really like to see opportunities where you're able to reach out to your community and bring people in to have their voices heard. All right, next slide, please. So we don't fund governmental functions. We don't fund lobbying activities. And when we say lobbying, what we mean is there is an actual specific bill. It's been introduced, so it has a bill number, and you would be taking a stand on that bill and asking the decision maker to decide in a particular way. So we cannot do that with these funds. I want to always say, though, that 501c3s and Canadian charities both can do lots of lobbying legally. That's not a problem. It's simply our funding source that doesn't allow it. We also can't fund projects that have already been completed. Can't do that retroactively. We don't pay for consulting activities because we have an internal program to do that. And we can't do anything with partisan election activities. No C3s or charities can do those things. Next slide. Yes, please call us for help. We're happy to talk through any project ideas you have. We do ask, if you can, to call at least a week before the deadline. Otherwise, we get a whole lot of calls right before. But we know sometimes that happens, and we'll still take the call. The grant period for the spring cycle will begin on July 1st and run through next year through June 30th. So it's a 1-year cycle unless you have something else in mind. If you need 2 years, if you need 3 months, you can ask for that as well. But generally they're 1-year grants, and that the report is due about a month later. All right, next slide. This is just a quick run through of some of the things we ask ourselves when we're preparing an application for funding. We raise all the money to give away and all the money that we use to operate. So we know what you're going through. And we just wanted to share some of the things that we think about in that process. So we start with, what is the problem I'm trying to solve? And who are the decision makers who can help change that problem or solve that problem? How are we going to connect with that decision maker? That could be agency staff, it could be the mayor, it could be a federal legislator, it could be a corporation executive. Then what tools and information can we provide that helps to educate them? So thinking through, what are we going to have to develop in terms of messages to get to that decision maker? And finally, would it help to discuss this with something outside to see if they have an additional thoughts. Sometimes it's really good idea to just have a quick call with a friend or us to describe the project, and sometimes people who haven't been engaged in these things can have really great ideas to add. Next slide, please. So as I said, you do have to become a member at some level to apply, and we want to share the benefits beyond applying for grants. In addition, you can participate in our networks to exchange information with others, and that includes if you have a question that might be relevant that somebody else in a similar position in a different place might be able to help answer. We will put that question out to our network of groups, and often they have really great answers, and they also sometimes have volunteered to help train a group about how to review a certain permit or that sort of thing. So that can be a nice option. Also, you get reduced fees for our consulting, and you can also get grants for that consulting. You will receive our newsletter. We have online resources just for members, as well as toolkits. And then we also hold trainings and events for members. So those are some of the benefits with membership. Next slide. All right, that's it for me just talking at you. So I know that was a lot, but hopefully that's helpful to you. And now I just want to hear your questions or thoughts. And feel free to just unmute. You can raise your hand if that's easier, however you want to do it.
This is Ross Feltus in Pentwater.
Go ahead, Ross.
Sure. Okay. So our Lake Association and the affiliated Friends of the Watershed is at the beginning stages. Trying to initiate a watershed management plan, study and plan. In the state of Michigan agencies, guidelines and checklists, in the Michigan State University and the state agency's guide to preparing watershed plans, and then in many EPA guides, they all state that a riparian survey is a necessary part early in the process. So intent there is not only to get information, but to educate. So they point to the need to identify the public concerns, the land use, educational needs that, or informational needs that the public may need as derived from that survey, and then certainly identify potential collaborators, groups, this idea of individuals involved in participating, supportive of the project. They even list, and these guys list questions, particular information to be derived from this survey, and there's the big database with the list of questions one might draw from. EPA notes that one of the reasons for failures of watershed plans is failure to get buy-in, involvement, sense of ownership from the public, and so these surveys act in that capacity. So the survey itself is not the end goal. The survey itself is not the costly undertaking. It's not the permanent fix, but it's part of the plan to get to that significant permanent change in this case, water quality. So it certainly seems to be a necessary component, and would seem to play a strong role in advocacy, the interaction. But my understanding is that maybe how do we ask that question of using this survey as the beginning step, again, in itself not being the big fix, the final permanent change, beginning.
Yeah,
present this?
It's a great question, Ross. Thank you for the question. And what I would say is, in that survey, I'm pretty familiar with 319 management plans and the like. And in that survey, I think if to convince our readers that this has an advocacy component, you'd really have to let them know what are you asking that will allow for that permanent change. Yes, will be some things that come from the science as you look at the whole watershed management plan, but as you said, when you're out doing that survey, are there questions you can ask that will allow that advocacy to come later, to figure out what people are interested in seeing change and what problems they've seen, and then giving a clear link between learning about that and what will happen with it, even whether it's through the watershed management plan or not, I guess. Sometimes management plans aren't the best place for advocacy, but usually there's an organization working on that might take it on the side as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Other questions?
Yeah, so from one Jill to another, Jill and company.
Yeah.
So we're a relatively new organization, although many of the members that are part of the consortium have been involved in environmental issues in this region for many, many years. But as a new organization, we have done our best within our kind of pool of talents to try and communicate and advocate, for a number of the most pressing issues in the area. And to that end, we, have, an electronic newsletter. We have a website. We use Facebook in limited capacities. We do tabling. We do a whole bunch of, activities. But what we're wondering is, do you see as appropriate the kinds of things that we really recognize that we need is to kind of step it up a notch in order for us to really help make the community more aware of these different issues, because it is, like most other areas, kind of political, and they tend to sway in the direction of the dollars, not necessarily, where the bulk of the community really feels on a lot of these issues. But so things like hiring someone to help us do better design work on some of our materials that we use for tabling events, a little bit more with our digital resources, those kinds of things, because that's where we see that we're not, quite up to, what we would like to see for effective communication. And part of that does lead into trying to work at convincing both the politicians, but particularly our Region 9 DEC, Department of Environmental Conservation, about kind of their policies that they don't necessarily follow through on. And so again, it's kind of our credibility with the community helps us to be more credible with the DEC, because they tend to lean towards the politicians who, hold the money. Anyway, that's kind of more detail than you need, but so are those the kinds of things that can go into budgets that are deemed appropriate?
Absolutely. So those become the tools for which you're going to win your advocacy issue, right? So it's just making clear for the readers that here are some of the issues we're going to be working on, and these are the tools we need to do to work on them and to succeed. And I mean, we've paid for everything from flyers to yard signs to billboards to websites, the whole, anything you could think of. So yes, all
Great.
of those things are fair game.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I see Jay has his hand raised. Go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, so I got a question about, So there it seems like some of the categories aren't necessarily separate and distinct, that there might be some overlap. And I guess I'm curious about that so that I'm not confused. So when I see, let me put my hand down. When I see advocacy and then consulting and communication, I think there's a couple areas where we could use some help around communication, and it's a larger communication strategy. I think we've got a fair number of, volunteers on the ground. We've done canvassing, but it's more like, what kind of relationship should we have with our local press and beat reporters who cover the issues that are important to us, and a strategy to be in regular and consistent contact with them so that we can elevate the discussion and advance our cause. That's something that, back in the day when everybody had a blue book, before everything was, all electronic and whatnot, you had consultants, you had a PR department, they developed a strategy. We have work that we're doing, but I don't think we have a communication strategy. And I think it's not only the outreach stuff that happens in our neighborhood, but it's outreach to elected officials and public agencies, it's outreach to the media, and just looking at that, it's a very complex matrix, right? And I think that we could really use some help in that area as a fledgling group. And I guess, do you have consultants that do that, or is that, do you have like public sector consultants on retainer and you just send them our way, or how does that work?
We don't have PSCs.
We like them. They're expensive.
They are.
Yeah.
But I totally understand what you mean. So there are two different programs. You can ask for two things in this spring grant program. Once you get into the application, we ask you about the project that you want us to give you money for.
Right.
That's one thing. Then we also ask you if there are areas for which you would like consulting. So that's our consulting services. And
Okay.
Leslie, who introduced herself earlier on our staff, she is our communications person. And so within this, she could set up some consulting with your group to look at those communications things over time.
Right.
The communications grants program, the separate thing,
Mhm.
is we do have consultants for that. But it's one of those things where you start in March and you go till October, and it's pretty rigorous. So it's maybe not exactly what you're looking for at this time, maybe in a future year.
Would it be fair to capture the essence of the consulting work as technical assistance? Like, you have different professionals in different areas of expertise. So for example, if we get ready to want to pursue charitable status, do you have an attorney that we could use to help with that? If you have,
We don't have an attorney, but we have me.
Okay. All right, cool. I've worked in, I actually am a technical assistance provider myself when I work with MISTA, Michigan State Housing Development Authority. So I'm familiar with kind of how that works. So we apply to you for TA and a consulting activity. You've got a pool of professionals available to, and you do the dating and match, right?
Yes.
Is that how that works?
Yes.
Got it. Okay,
Yep.
Great. So I think, was trying to figure out, I didn't see the link to the actual, is there a grant application on the street where we can look at and refer to and have specific questions about? Or is
Yes.
it,
Alana, can you put that in
put that in the
the
chat maybe or
chat?
something? Yeah, that'd be great.
Thank you. Yeah,
Cool.
she'll put it in the chat for us.
All right, cool. Because I think I might have some specific questions once I see the document. Maybe it was sent out earlier.
Yeah.
I might have missed it. I apologize. So,
We probably didn't.
okay. All right, cool. Thanks.
No worries. It's on us. Any other questions?
I'm going to raise my
Yes.
hand here. Hi.
Sure, Lindsay, go ahead, and then I'm
Yeah.
going to come back.
Okay, great. The question I have is kind of specific to our situation, but I'm just going to ask it here. I don't know if it's helpful to others or not. So we're a lake association in New York State, and we're part of a regional coalition of several other area lakes. And we don't currently we're kind of operating under the umbrella of a different organization. We meet monthly, but we don't have our own like 501c3 charitable status at this point. It might be something we pursue in the future. Right now, it's kind of working as a great regional coalition as is, but we might take that on in the future. So the question I have is specific to like what is considered grassroots. So in our particular situation, if we wanted to apply from a regional coalition perspective, would we actually apply through one of our lake associations individually, since we're not established 501c3? Would you recommend that we do it that way?
Well, no.
Okay.
Actually, I would suggest that you just use one of them as your sponsor, so
Okay.
that it's as clean as possible. I would suggest you apply, have the applicant be the group that's really going to be doing the work,
Okay.
but then use a sponsor.
A
to-
sponsor.
to do
And
that.
And would you recommend that that sponsor fall within the grassroots guidelines of that $200,000?
No, they don't have to.
Okay, all right. That answers my question. Thank you very
Sure,
much.
great question. Yeah, thanks. And then I noticed, I'm sorry, I forgot valued customer's iPhone name again. Forgive me.
Lois,
Thank you, Louis. Go right ahead.
my question is, we are very grassroots, definitely under $200,000. And we have in our Three Lakes area, Lake Bel Air and Intermediate River, that there's a wastewater treatment plant
I'm familiar.
that
Yep.
they are working to change the permit. We also are questioning if things have been done per the permit.
Mhm.
And one of the things that we are working to do for this one specifically is that we're going to be monitoring the river flow to see how what it's picking up and what it's taking into the lakes and things. And I'm wondering, is that the kind of thing that we can get a grant for?
Yes. So a word about monitoring in general.
Mhm.
We tend not to do baseline monitoring. Sometimes people just want to get an idea of what's happening. And while that's valuable, we kind of go to the advocacy side again with our money, and that, so if you're going to do monitoring, it should be something exactly like you're explaining.
Specific.
You know, yeah, you're looking at something that could be having a harm. Is it having a harm? And so, yeah, that kind of monitoring can definitely be included.
Yes, well, the other thing that we're actually working with the USGS on Torch Lake and a couple other lake associations, but that's really, I think that's more base type monitoring. I'm trying to find about the golden brown algae that's huge in Torch Lake. That I think is probably more in the realm of the long term getting the information, but this, so you think maybe the treatment plant is something we can go for?
That's definitely right up our alley.
Yay.
Monitoring permits, participating in comments, doing the science, absolutely.
Yeah, our organization is very science-based, and the
Yeah, I know Three Lakes pretty well.
oh, all right.
And Torch is one of my favorite paddling lakes too.
Yay. Well, thank you.
Sure, thank you. All right, anyone else? Yes, Thomas.
The White River Watershed Partnership that I work with has been around a long time, actually, and has been fairly active in the watershed. We have the sense somewhat that we're facing a kind of midlife crisis where it's not very clear to us exactly what the road ahead should look like to optimize the use of our resources. We do have some baseline funding. We're very fortunate in that regard, in that we have baseline continuing funding through a couple of local community foundations.
Nice.
So while of course we could always use more money, who couldn't?
Of course.
We're not about to go out of business, and we have been able to initiate and maintain a couple of active monitoring programs. So I would describe this midlife crisis. Actually, I think I'm giving us the benefit of the doubt, because given the average age of our board members, I'd say we were well past the midlife crisis stage. But that's one of the problems, is that we have an aging board, and I'm the chief representative of the aging faction of the board. And we've had a couple of key resignations recently, and are kind of not very sure about how to go ahead and recruit suitable replacements. I mean, other than asking around amongst people that we know, which I'm sure has some value, but and also we have a very small membership given the size of the watershed and its importance. So we need help we see ourselves as needing help in some aspects of capacity building, and particularly in having a good hard look at where we should be going strategically in the next few years.
Yeah, so it sounds like succession planning to me. Maybe you want to call it strategic planning, but I look at strategic planning with, there's a special part of that is when a board is turning over, an organization is changing significantly, or you're losing key leadership, either in paid staff or board. And
we have new partners coming into play too.
oh, good.
Trout Unlimited has decided to devote considerable resources to the White River watershed, and that's also has an effect on how we should be prioritizing our efforts.
Sure. Yeah, so you might be interested in working with one of us to do some of that planning. We offer both strategic planning and succession planning. I've done quite a few succession plans myself, and it includes doing that scan. Who's out there? Who's sharing the work? How are we partnering with them? Looking forward to what you think the organization needs to do forward, going forward, and then also looking at where do you need to recruit and how do you do that?
Yeah, I'm sure you've been through these same issues with other organizations, and we'd like to be able to get the benefit of your experience in that regard.
Absolutely. So yeah, you can even just call us if you want to get that part started. The way we work on our consulting is you can come in through the grants program telling us in the application, or you can just call us and tell us what you need. We'll talk it through with you, and then we send you a scope of work stating what we think we could help with, and what that would look like, and how many hours it would take, and all of that. So that's certainly available.
Well, I would have to, yeah, I understand, and I would have to discuss that with the other board members and formulate something in writing that you could work with. And I think we'll probably proceed that way.
Okay, sounds great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Excellent. All right, any other questions? Okay. Well, I appreciate all of your time. I know your time is precious, and you've given us 46 minutes here today, and I appreciate it. As we've said, the easiest thing is to give us a call. So if you're unsure as you get into things, please give us a call. We do not want to cost you time. So please let us know. But we look forward to getting some great new proposals in March. That's always a highlight for us. So we're really glad to see some new faces here, and we look forward to talking with you. Have a great day.
Can I add one thing, Jill, before we go?
Yes, sure.
If you send a grant if you send an application to us, if you don't hear from us within 24 hours, please reach out, because I don't want anything to, it is going to be on a weekend this year, so I don't want to miss anybody's application. So I try to get back to everybody after I've received their application. So if you don't hear from me, please let me know. Yeah,
emails do actually get lost. And so we like to reply so that everybody knows we've received it. We have had an occasion where we never got something. So that's a great reminder, Lori. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, yes. Go ahead, Lois.
phone. I am wondering, you've got the September grant thing too. Is that like a separate kind of criteria?
Oh,
Different?
great question. I should have been more clear. That's just the second round of these. With each of our grants programs, an organization can receive up to one per year. So you can't receive a spring one and a fall one.
Okay,
You can get either one. So if the spring cycle doesn't work for you, you don't get chosen, or the timing isn't right, you can go ahead with the fall cycle, which then the grant would start on January 1st.
so you don't have, it doesn't just automatically roll over then. If we don't get picked, it doesn't just automatically roll over to the next one.
It doesn't, but if
Okay.
you don't get picked and you want us to do that, we will.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Everybody have a great day.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.